great to see you, and thanks for waving. If you need to do a little multitasking or you prefer to have your camera off, we certainly understand and respect that. So welcome to everybody. I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose, and this is a pleasure. Roya Hakakian, our guest of honor today, is a writer, a poet, a human rights champion. In addition to her countless articles, she writes books. One notable book, For the Sake of Water, selected poems in Persian. Another, Journey from the Land of No. My favorite, actually, Roya, is Assassins of the Turquoise Palace, which is a political story that begins in a Greek restaurant in Berlin called Mykonos in 1992, and a dinner and gathering of a small group of Iranian and Kurdish oppositionists whose meal is interrupted by two masked men and machine gun fire, an assassination in Berlin. I think it's in the neighborhood of Wilmersdorf, as I recall. Stable, affluent, and calm neighborhood in Berlin, and a story that you weave together that takes us back to Tehran and the highest levels of Iranian rule. It's a fabulous book, but everything you write is fabulous, including this one. I'm sorry I can't hold it up because I've read it on my iPad, but it is a beginner's guide to America with a subtitle telling us that this book, Roya, is written for immigrants and the curious. Everybody on this call is curious. And I think anybody who has traveled abroad or lived abroad or spent time abroad will relate to parts of this book in a way that's charming and amusing. You write with admiration and affection about your time, arrival, and life in America, and with criticism too. You have a critical eye. So Roy, welcome, congratulations on the book, and thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's such a great pleasure. First and foremost, because it's wonderful to talk about this book, but especially to this particular audience, and to be in conversation with you, because I don't remember releasing a book without you throwing a party for me or holding an event. So it feels like the only way I can be launched is if we do a conversation. So it's a delight. Thank you.
Well, Roy, that's kind of you to say. And then this summer or fall, let's do a party in your honor in person when we're all vaccinated and together. So Roy, let me ask you a question that is a preface to the book. I think you ought to tell us in this group a little bit, before we talk about the Immigrant's Guide to America. Say a word about where and how you grew up in what you call at one point is your first beloved homeland. Tell us that piece of your life briefly, would you?
And of course, I was born and raised in a Jewish family in Iran. And the most important, most formative years of my life were shaped by the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So I came of age just about the time when the Ayatollah arrived in Tehran from exile in February of 1979. And life as we knew it transformed in the subsequent years. And I spent the years of my junior high and high school under the new Islamic regime, which also tremendously shaped the way I saw the world then, and I continue to see the world today. And then in 1984, my mother and I were left Iran under the guise of being Armenian Iranians, because Jewish Iranians were unable to receive passports or renew their passports, and not because there were any ostensible official laws that prevented Jews from renewing their passports, leaving the country, but there were inostensible ways in which Jews were just discouraged from leaving or were just harassed. And this was one of the ways in which we were harassed. So We ended up finding someone who swapped our initial Jewish applications with Armenian applications. And my IAN at the end of my last name helped. So we flew out, spent about a year in Europe waiting for our asylum applications to the United States to be approved. And I arrived in 1985.
So Roy, why, if I may ask,
Sure.
Can you hear me, Roy?
Yes, I can.
Why, if I may ask, was the United States the final destination? You stopped and you stayed in Europe.
Yes.
And of course, some Iranians have made Europe
Right.
their home since the revolution in places like Germany. Why the United States?
My brothers had already been here. And so our case was a case of family reunification. We wanted to be together. Our other relatives had already come, and they had started lives. They had finished schools, and one of my brothers had gotten married, started a business. So it looked like the most stable place we could rely on at the time.
Okay, thank you. Now, the book itself, Roya, I appreciate greatly. It's so filled, it's so rich with personal impressions. And they're amusing, and they're charming, and they're thought-provoking. Early on in the book, you make the observation that, now I'm paraphrasing, but that in your early encounters, you found the United States so warm, welcoming, and inclusive. But you note that not infrequently we Americans welcome and have momentary interest in your past, your achievements, the turmoil, the conflict, the accomplishments, whatever that is. There's the tendency to say, interesting. And now what would you like to eat? And one moves on. It's this kind of forward-leaning push. And how do you describe that? How do you speak to that experience you've had?
Well, you mentioned that the book is full of personal observations, and I must say that it is. But it's also an aggregate of observations by fellow immigrants, whether it's been through interviews or archival testimonies or other memoirs. So it is a strange superimposition, the layering of aspects of our memories that seem to overlap. And I realized that in the process of doing so, I have rebelled against genre. In other words, it's really neither memoir nor fiction, and certainly not a straightforward nonfiction. But I just wanted to make the point that even the personal observations I made sure are shared with at least several other people who have gone through the similar process. You mentioned this forward-looking quality of Americans, which I think most Americans fail to recognize about themselves, which to people from my background make this people and this country incredibly alluring and exceptionally different. Imagine I had just come from Iran, where we were, where our calendar is based on, all these Shiite observances, and revolves around the births and the deaths of so many imams and religious leaders. And so most of my adolescence was shaped by these gloomy observances. There seemed to be no end to this grieving process that was publicly unfolding, if not every week, certainly every month on the streets. And then to kind of go from that place where we were either angrily demonstrating or or grieving events that had already unfolded, God knows how long ago, some of them more recently than others, and come to this place where people pulled out their calendars and they started to intricately plan where it was that they were going to go in the next week or the next month or the next year. And then, that planning process became a major project in life. You bought books and tried to learn about what it was that you were going to do or where it was that you were going to visit, which at the bottom of it all creates a sense of forward-lookingness, creates a sense that there is a future to which we are tied. And I think that is what I profoundly appreciated, because back where I was, there was no sense of future. There was a great deal about the past and a great deal of complete engagement and preoccupation with what had gone wrong and why we were, we had all those emotions tied to those events. But there was no sense of, where was the future going and how were we going to get there? And so to me, this simple idea of planning, which Americans do so well, the weddings are planned way in advance and, hold the date cards go out. So this notion that there was a future and that therefore our project was to live on and to reach that future and to look forward to it was profoundly earth-shattering.
So Roy, thank you. I wonder, as I hear you speak and as I read your book, I wonder if compared to others,
Mm-hmm.
if we Americans wear history lightly, you wouldn't always know that or think that. I'm reminded as I hear you speak just now of a instance. Bear with me, it's not directly related, but it relates maybe. There's a book that Condi Rice wrote about the German reunification process, and a moment when Europeans were so upset about the prospect of German unification, and Mitterrand flew to East Berlin, and Mrs. Thatcher was upset, and the Poles were upset, and apparently in an Oval Office meeting, George Bush 41 said to his advisors about Germany, "It's time to let a guy up." Just like that,
Right?
They were down, they were divided, they paid their dues. It's time to let a guy up. That was not the French or Polish or Russian or British view. But let me push this further a little bit, Roya, and say you have chapters and then you have these sections that build out the chapters. And it's curious what you pick and what you go after. And they're many. So I'll pick one or two. Grocery shopping. Okay. Why grocery shopping? And some people are smiling already. There's something about the choice that can be vast, but also you say, but the attitude, I'll let you say, about how one interacts with grocery store employees as a new rival compared to your home country in any case. Could you tell us why the grocery store and what do you have to say about that?
Well, is everybody aware, I wonder how many people have spent serious time overseas, especially in the developing countries, to realize that our supermarkets and our grocery stores are more astounding than our Disneylands and our amusement parks. I mean, I have never met a fellow immigrant who didn't comment on the staggering variety of cereal in the cereal aisle. And in fact, now that we were talking about cereal, I remember a veteran who had spent a great deal of time in Iraq coming back and saying to me that being in the cereal aisle was the first sign that really reminded him or told him that he was no longer in Iraq. Not seeing his wife and his family, but you know, the reality of this variety that couldn't possibly exist but anywhere else in America. And I think it's you know, it's very easy to look at it and think of two paradoxical, you know, think two paradoxical thoughts. The first is, do they really need all this? And isn't this precisely the sign of American frivolity that we, you know, I heard the criticism of where I come from? Or the other possibility is to look at it and say, isn't a democracy or America about choice? And isn't this whole project nothing other than engaging the individual to say, you are the person who needs to think and make decisions about every small step in life. And so I think it's certainly possible to look at it in both ways. It's you know, one can coexist with the other one at the same time. But I do think that so many of these small signs that we seem to dismiss as, you know, as dismissible aspects of our daily lives in America are, in fact, if we read closely, small manifestations of our democratic rights, our founding principles within these routine exchanges. So, you know, so is, may I help you in the store? I mean, you know, the fact that the seller or the, you know, store manager thinks that that anybody who walks in is someone to acknowledge is something that, you know, in undemocratic places where you go, where, you know, consumers don't have rights and people are generally mistrustful of each other, and certainly of corporations, big stores, big businesses. It's harder to come by these sorts of interactions in other places. And I think it's really important to recognize how we arrive at these small, exclusively American manifestations.
Roya, thank you. I'm going to turn for a moment to my young colleague, Emma, who, when she came across your book and our internal conversations in American Purpose, jumped up and said, I want to read this. Emma, would you tell us a little bit about your family background and why you found this book, without even looking at the first page, why you found it so appealing? And then I want to turn it over to you to ask a question of your own. Emma?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for being here. My mom is an immigrant as well, which is why I had that personal interest in your book. She came to the US in her late 20s, so similar to the experience of the immigrant in the book. She, however, came from Spain, so a much more developed country, and she wasn't seeking asylum, so it was different, a different experience. But I was pleasantly surprised at how much of the book I related to so deeply, that even though she wasn't fleeing conflict, and she was coming, you know, from a really poor background, but nothing as grave as what I'm sure you experienced, there was still so much that I related to and identified with. And there's this kind of universal, almost universal experience of an immigrant that comes to the US. And I hadn't ever realized that, so.
Oh, thank you, Emma. That makes me so happy, except that you can't show happiness in Zoom very well. Other than throw your hands up. But yes, I mean, I also teach writing. And one of the things that I always say to my students in courses that have to do with you know, writing memoirs is that unless you can find the universal within the personal, then, you know, the overwhelming majority of memoirs have no reason to be written. So I think what I tried to do was to try to figure out what are the most vivid memories I have or observations that I've had all along, and then try to see whether they, there are moments of overlap between my own recollections and my own experiences and others, and then try to figure out whether the the accumulation of all of this can say something or can make the immigrant in a way accessible to the curious, the native born Americans, so as to create a sense of knowing or a sense of knowledge about the immigrant who seem to be under grave scrutiny and doubt, especially 3-4 years ago when I began writing this book. So, it was very easy for all of us as refugees and immigrants, and especially for me. I mean, I came with no English, no, I don't know, a backpack, for God's sake. And when there was the talk of only allowing immigrants who spoke English or had money or had special skills, the very first thought on my mind was, I would have never got in, and so I thought, in defense of my own presence in this country, in defense of us as immigrants who come, to seek refuge in America, the best thing I could do was to make our experiences accessible to those who doubted our value, our integrity, or whatever else. And it really was an effort toward that. And it makes me tremendously happy to know that you find pieces of your mother's memories in the book. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I think especially because the writing of it in the second person was especially powerful, I think, for me being, having this experience with an immigrant mother, but also for someone who, has never been an immigrant in their lives. Yeah. Jeff, should I ask a question?
Yeah, and ask a question, and then in moments, we're gonna open it up to the group, but go ahead and please ask a question.
Okay, yeah. Actually, the first thing that you both talked about was exactly what I wanted to also talk about and ask about. I particularly identified with your point about Americans being avid planners and living in the future. I was like, I can't believe someone actually put this in words. Like, I couldn't ever explain it better. And I remember you said they pounce on the future like beasts on their prey, which I loved, and it's so true. Because my father is American and my mother is Spanish, so. Yeah. My experience growing up was this tug of war almost between my dad's fervent concern for my future in education and, years and jobs. Like, he was asking me what Ivy League I wanted to go to when I was 7. And then there's my mom, who has this passion for the present. And, Spanish people, they take siesta, they nap after meals. They don't plan for the future. They live they love the present, and they're much less obsessed with this planning aspect of American culture. So, and you described it as a positive aspect, which I'm sure an Iranian immigrant would relate to. However, I wonder if you can see this aspect of American culture ever being negative or difficult for American youth, or just negative for the country.
Of course I do. I mean, that would be the sequel to this book, First let's show, I mean, the main project of this book was to, obviously this isn't a guide for new immigrants, because no new immigrant can pick up this book and, really relate, because so much of the information is stuff that they can appreciate years after they've already settled to be like you or your mom, and look back and say, oh yeah. And of course, I as a new immigrant didn't have that much English to sit down with a book like this. But a really main intention of this book is to reveal the America we see as newcomers, especially from undemocratic nations, to the native-born Americans who don't have that view of the country and the ways in which they are endowed with boundless gifts, or the way in which they make bad decisions. And I think what you say about this, forward-looking, future thinking attitude is a double-edged sword. It can be a wonderful thing, and it is to be tied to plans, in the next day, next week, next month. It creates, kind of fuels the personal engine to want to get up in the morning and because there is a reason for it. But it can also get in the way of doing what your mother does, living in the moment and appreciating how life unfolds in moments that truly need to be witnessed and appreciated.
Yeah.
Emma, thank you. And Roya, thank you. I'm going to jump in. I know it's half past the hour, and we have 30 minutes left, and we'll have a hard stop at 1 p.m. Eastern. May I open it up? I've seen heads nodding, smiles, haven't seen grimaces yet, but some of these things are resonating with some people in some way. Do I have someone who would like to ask a question? Michelle.
Unmute. Okay, hi. I think what was really powerful, and just reading some of your writings and listening to you speak to our host of our podcast, Richard Aldous, this combination of both this incredible appreciation for and love of a place that you come to, and because you see the distinctions, you can appreciate so clearly what's great about it, with the downside of being, the negative treatment toward immigrants or negative rhetoric sometime. And that was so poignant, the way you've communicated that. I guess just I wanted to hear you speak to that dichotomy a little bit of the positive and the negative. And
yeah, I mean, look, America has been, among all the Western nations, an ideal destination in comparison to other Western nations for immigrants. So there is something we're doing right. And there, the fact that we managed to eventually, within a generation or two, unify these communities into the fabric of our nation is a sign of success. That said, it doesn't mean that we are welcoming necessarily, or we welcome everybody equally, or that we haven't had periods of really regrettable and incredibly evil moments throughout our history, where we have discriminated against communities and held people who deserve to be equal citizens back. I'm thinking primarily of the Chinese Americans who were subject to the Chinese Exclusion Act for decades and decades. So it's I see it again in this double-edged view, that on one hand, we seem to be equal opportunity lenders throughout our history where discrimination is concerned. Benjamin Franklin didn't want Germans to come. He didn't think they were smart enough or that they were capable of learning the language. And he hated seeing that, in their neighborhoods, they would put up German names for every street alongside with English names, which, I don't need to remind anybody here that we're hearing similar criticisms of, Spanish-speaking communities in this country today. So, I am sure I'm strange that way, but I find something reassuring in the fact that from Benjamin Franklin on, we have heard these arguments against various groups of immigrants. And one way or another, we have come through and we have imperfectly reconciled and incorporated these communities within our general nation. And so that tells me that the movement forward has not been, hasn't really addressed all the shortcomings and needs to do so. But at the same time, the movement forward has been a good one. And I think we need to build on it, remembering that this is how we have been, and somehow we've come through these awful periods.
Michelle, thank you. And Roy, thanks. I'm going to call on Alan Luxembourg, please, and then Don Bishop.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Roya, good to see you after many years.
Hi, Alan. Yes.
What you've done is provided perhaps an anthropological perspective on modern America by looking at, say, the day cards and grocery stores. And I understand you're saving for your sequel, The Dark Side,
Mm-hmm.
and you started to comment on it in respect to anti-immigrant sentiment. But I'm wondering, since probably one of the most central issues we face today is racism, I'm wondering, how did you assimilate evidence of racism into your larger understanding of American society?
Well, I don't think the manifestations of racism in America today are necessarily the reaction to the immigration issue. I think we are at a point of crisis. It's a national crisis where, you know, certain forces in our country or certain groups of people are worried about their own future. And although this may manifest itself in objection to, you know, allowing certain groups to emigrate to this country, it wouldn't go, these problems wouldn't go away, even if we keep these immigrants out. So I think while the problem appears to be in part a problem of immigration, it isn't really about immigrants and immigration. It's about a point of crisis that we have arrived at where, you know, portions of our American population feel worried about their own future, feel worried about, you know, losing control or losing mastery of their own lives. And so I think this is far more, this in some ways is being wrongly framed as an issue having to do with immigration than a moment that we need to reflect nationally on, for instance, what it means to be American. Is Americanness about you know, skin color, race, religion, or ethnicity, or is Americanness about something far deeper and more important? Is it about, you know, shared values, shared principles? Is it about showing loyalty and commitment to certain ideals? And I think, you know, and I think this is an aspect of that conversation to be had. I even think that the conversation about, you know, the border is being framed in a wrong way. It isn't about, you know, it manifests itself at the border when as an immigration problem, but at the heart of it, it's a continental crisis that whose roots have nothing to do with immigration and cannot be addressed unless we really think about what are the forces that are displacing these people. So I think we keep thinking about, you know, some deeper, more serious issues as issues of immigrants and immigration, whereas they're about you know, the uncertainty of certain communities within us who have assumed that being American has been about, is a gift that has been granted to them by virtue of their race, their ethnicity, and it is this moment that's reminding them that no, such is not the case. So where do we go from here? How do we define a new view or vision of who we are and what makes us all Americans?
Great. Thank you both. We're going to move right ahead to Don Bishop, if you're ready, Don.
Yes. I got married when I was in the Air Force in Korea. And when my wife arrived in the United States, her first visit, and I took her to the Big Bear grocery store in Columbus, Ohio, she had a experience, I think, much like yours. And that's some years ago now, but this has become fixed as a family legend, the first visit to the grocery. So, but I won't amuse you all with that story. You used the phrase that as people and then as perhaps groups of immigrants come to the United States, you said they become woven into the fabric of the nation. I like the phrase a lot. That, of course, raises the question of the old idea of assimilation.
Yes.
Which has been much debated, and we know the contours of that. And so assimilation and salad bowl, melting pot, all of these phrases, and sometimes bitter debates about these phrases are part of the national conversation about immigration. And I wonder if you take melting pot, salad bowl, and assimilation, where do you come down on those traditional ways to frame what happens to immigrant groups after a few generations?
And before you answer that, Roya, I should have done this all along. Let me catch up and say each person, and Don, I know who you are, and many do, but maybe not everybody. Don, would you introduce yourself briefly?
I'm Don Bishop. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer, but now I'm teaching Marines down at in Quantico. And I have a Korean wife.
And you
Thanks, Don.
Thank you so much. I think I understand why the old, model of melting pot or salad bowl didn't work for previous generations, or there's rebellion against that view, because even though we called it a melting pot, we weren't welcoming necessarily, or didn't grant equal rights to so many of these immigrant communities. So it's very natural for so many of us to carry these bitternesses within ourselves, and then once we are in the position to reject and say, no, it isn't exactly as you say, it didn't go so smoothly as you describe, which I completely honor, because we cannot simply walk away from from these moments of hazing that we have subjected our immigrant communities to. We have done it with again, Chinese immigrants, Japanese immigrants. So to simply embrace the melting pot idea without recognizing the wrongs that have been committed, or trying to somehow acknowledge these awful histories, would be just to set ourselves up for rejection by the subsequent generations. However, I don't think that means that the melting pot was a bad idea or should be done away with. I just think that we need a more sophisticated and expanded view where we as a nation recognize and acknowledge what past history has brought or has wrought, and what errors we have made, and then in light of that, we issue a call for unity at the same time. I mean, something that's really important to remember is that the reason the rest of us who come from abroad want to become Americans is because America allows us to be who we are too. We have parades of all sorts. We can be, our own. We can exercise our cultural heritage and traditions freely and openly. But there, and as much beauty as there is in that, there's also great beauty and desire to be part of something greater. So I don't think our melting pot formula was wrong, but I think the reason some of us within these newer generations are rejecting it is because the melting pot implied that everyone came and everyone was equally welcome and fit right in. And so all of the history of the mistakes we made and the injustices that were committed are assumed, wiped away, and erased. And I think there's a lot to be said about the value of acknowledging, the mistakes we've made, recognizing what we've done wrong, and creating sort of a sense of awareness about these past errors, and then re-emphasizing that while everyone can be who they are and practice those things, we also, our strength is in our unity. So it's a melting pot 2.0 that we need to, I think, introduce.
Hey, Don, thank you. And Roya, thank you for that. We're going to turn to Patrick Chamarel, who is with Stanford and also with American Purpose as a member of our editorial board. Patrick, welcome, and we're happy to hear from you now. And you need to unmute.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick, you're on mute. You need to press a button to take yourself off mute, and then
Yes.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, for reminding me. And thank you, Roya, for, I said, writing this book and talking about it so eloquently. I will certainly rush to read it. And I'm from France, and I don't consider myself an immigrant because, I'm from a democratic country. I can go back to France whenever I want, almost. Mm-hmm. And so I am maybe on the spectrum of that represented by you and by Emma. I'm still another kind of at another place. I was wondering if you sometimes want to be recognized as an Iranian, not just as an American. Obviously, you're proud to be an American, mm-hmm. But do you feel frustrated that sometimes people don't see you also as an Iranian and take interest in that part of your identity?
Oh, this may be unique to Iranian Americans, but I can hardly go any place where my Iranian identity is not at the center of dinner party conversations and interactions. So I think, people from, quieter countries may have that problem. I have never had that problem. In fact, I was writing a piece earlier today, and one of the things I wrote was, sometimes I get invited to parties and I contemplate whether I can introduce myself as a Swedish astronaut, because the moment I say I'm Iranian immigrant, we're talking about hardliners and reformists and nuclear development. So I think in my case, I have never been able to actually get away from it. But what I have done over the years, what I've learned to do successfully, is to learn how to take control of this conversation, or how to bring new information or introduce new insight about what it means to be Iranian American to this conversation. But I can't say that I have gone to many places, if any, where it hasn't been, the fact of my Iranian identity hasn't been at the center. I mean, my children's school, every year for the occasion of the Iranian New Year, invite me to bring in a dish, an Iranian dish to share with the class. So start with, the elementary school to, local colleges and libraries. It's been at the heart of everything. It could be, the problem of Iran itself.
Yes. Yeah. So Roya, yes, do you think it's because Iran has loomed very large in American foreign policy and beyond that, or do you think it's because of the size of the Iranian community in the United States? And for example, I'm not perceived as, at least it's seemingly I'm not perceived as a French person in America. I'm only reminded that I am French when there is a international crisis and people, put like stickers on my car saying down with the French and these kind of things. But otherwise, I'm never reminded that I'm French, and probably because there is not a community and a history like there is with Iran. What do you think?
Right. I think. I mean, I'm writing about this. I think I am interested in kind of myself discovering, what it means to be Iranian American, because I just read a piece that argued that, Iranian Americans would like to assimilate, would like to Americanize, but, America doesn't allow them, doesn't give them this space. I don't believe that. But I do believe that being Iranian, as soon as it becomes clear that, whether it's through my accent or my strange last name or whatever, as soon as it becomes clear, then and I say it, it becomes the central point of conversation, and so I have never been able to get away from it, let alone misintroducing myself as such. And perhaps I should look forward to a day when things are so quiet that, because when my brother came to America in the mid 70s and he told people that he was from Iran, he had to bring out a map to show where Iran was, because people didn't know. And maybe I should just hope for a day when we return to that kind of peace and quiet.
Thank you.
So thank you for that exchange, Roy and Patrick. Patrick, I want to note parenthetically that while you may not be reminded in the United States you're French, you're reminding me that you're French all the time, anytime we speak about food or wine. And now I'm being a little bit too personal, but you all in these family conversations, Patrick once was speaking to me about wine, and I said, "Are you a collector?" And he said, No, I just like it. And I said, "Do you have some wine at home? Do you have bottles of wine?" He said, "Yes." I said, "How many?" Now, this is an American asking a Frenchman. He said, "Well, I don't know, maybe 400-500 bottles." And I said, "You're not a collector?" And he said, "No, of course not, you silly. I just have some wines at home that I like." Well, that's a little bit different here, Patrick. So
Okay, you've identified me as French. I understand.
yes, well, and proudly so, proud that you should be. So our colleague, we're almost in the home stretch here, 9 minutes to go. Our colleague Alex in chat has a question and a faulty microphone. I'll give you the succinct version. I think you can read it in chat. Roya, the question: why do you identify yourself as an immigrant rather than a Iranian exile?
Oh, well, I was an Iranian exile for a very long time. But then, there came a point where I realized that I've spent most of my life in this country. and that there was a strange sense that my interest in so many aspects of Iran was also through the perspective of an American, that I had, even my interest in Iran had shifted from the interest of an Iranian in diaspora to someone who, an American watching a place whose history and politics I understood and knew. So I think it was not a question of just pragmatism, but I needed to reorient my own sense of loyalty, my own sense of clarity about life and my place in life, by switching and by recognizing that it didn't look like I could go back, or I was about to go back. So I could no longer identify as exile. I had stayed here for too long, and the bridge to the past seemed to have completely gone away.
Roya, thank you. I've got Dan, and then I'm going to indulge myself and ask a final question, and we're going to wrap up. Dan, you have the floor.
Roya, it's an honor and a delight to.
I think the volume needs to go up a bit, Dan. Still soft.
How's this?
Much better.
Okay. So Roya, it's an honor and a delight to hear you today. I wonder if you could say something about Iranian Jews and, how it happened that there were still Iranian Jews 5 years after the Islamic takeover. And, and are there any left?
Mm-hmm. There are still Jews in Iran 41 years after the Islamic takeover of Iran. Isn't that amazing? I wrote a piece called Why They Stay, which if you Google online, you can find. But my own theory, hypothesis, I should say, is that there is a sense of kinship or shared suffering between the general population and the Jewish community that both now feel similarly oppressed by a regime they don't like. So whereas I think at the time of the Pahlavis, the previous regime, the monarchy, a Jewish person and an average Iranian seem to be at two sides of the political divide. In other words, an average Iranian may have been against the Shah or may have been disgruntled, and the Jews were naturally allies of the former king, of the Pahlavis. Today, that division that separated the average Iranian from the Jew because of their disagreement over the leadership of Iran has vanished. And I think the objection to the status quo in Iran has brought various groups together, including these odd religious groups who in the past didn't bond with the majority population. There's also another tragic observation, which is that 42 years ago, the Jewish community in Iran was 100,000+ members. Today, it's about less than 10,000. And so they stay because they have once again become invisible. And there are no truly overt and performances or presentations of the Jewish community. So they have once again gone under the radar. And that is how Jews have survived in Iran or in difficult places for centuries. So these are the two reasons I can think of.
So Dan, thank you. And Roya, thank you. I said I was going to ask a final question. I'm going to cheat and sneak two in, but they're brief. Roya, have you seen the thriller series? I think it's on Netflix, but I can't keep track, called Tehran.
I love it.
You'll love it.
I love it.
If you all haven't seen Tehran, about a Mossad agent back inside Iran, but getting kind of lost in family history and Jewish roots, watch it. It's fabulous. And then my proper last question, Roya, the January 6th attack on the US Capitol, with you and your background and where you come from, how did you experience that?
Well, Donald Trump is the reason, is the person to whom I owe this book, really. I mean, the rise of Trump caused me to think that I'd been called to service in this country, that for all the years that I'd been here, there was a great threat, and I had to do something to give voice to why I thought he was wrong, and the direction in which he was taking the country was wrong. So it started really in 2016, and I think it just came to a head on January 6th. I have found it, I was in New York City, I tell people, on 9/11, and nothing about that was as terrifying as the events of 2016 onward, leading to January 6th. So part of the reason why I wanted to, through this book, celebrate the small manifestations of the American democracy was to remind the native born who have not lived under democratic systems why our lives here worked and were lovely and tolerable under the system we've created, and why we must recognize these small manifestations of our democratic values and our founding principles in our daily lives. And if we don't, we run the risk of losing them. And so my response to January 6th and my response to, just the general events of 2016 was to become a voice for what we could lose, and what something other than the elections that happen to us every 4 years, that we have come to think of as the sign of our democracy, are worth hanging on to, because those are the small things that make us who we are and make us live the way we do.
Thank you. Those are, I think, perfect words to finish. Thank you for the other notes in chat, including you, Bill, Crystal, at the very end. I do believe that oftentimes, Roya, for us Americans, we take so much for granted. And when we hear from people like you, who come from backgrounds and suffering and journey to be here, it's a reminder of all that we have to cherish and defend, actually, because when it's gone, it's hard to recover, and it's hard to realize until then, really, how much we should appreciate. So I'm going to say thank you, Roya. Yes, Roya.
I wanted to say, so this is my American purpose.
Well said, and we're with you, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. So to everybody who took the time, thank you, thank you. Please buy and read Roya's book, A Beginner's Guide to America. Lovely conversation. Roya, thanks for your time. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.